So just a brief introduction. I want to introduce to you Abba Shapiro. He is our senior trainer. He is just an absolutely amazing trainer, super nice guy, easy to listen to, and really knows the software. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And thanks, Abba.
Well, thank you very much, Laurie, and welcome everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Over the next hour, I'm going to walk you through Aurora. It's a beginning course, but if you've actually played with it, you might pick up a trick or a tip or two. Just to give you an idea, Aurora, if you haven't used it, allows you to really bring out the details and punch up your images, whether you use a single image and run it through the application, or whether you use multiple images that you may have shot bracketed. Now, here's an example of before and after that we're going to be working with. This is an image that was shot somewhere between Nevada and California. I saw nice clouds. I hopped out in the middle of the street. There were no cars. I did not become roadkill, but I took multiple shots. I took what are called bracketed shots of over and underexposed images of this street. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hide this. So I just want to point out the type of images that we'll be working with today. I actually shot this bracketed, and if you look at these 6 images here, I believe I bracketed 6, or I think I bracketed 6 or 8, and I underexposed some so I could really get details in the clouds. And I properly exposed one in the middle, and this is a setting you can do in your camera. And then I also overexposed a couple, so when I blended it together, if there was detail in the shadows, I could bring them out. And shooting bracketed allows you a lot of flexibility when you're editing your photos. Now, I do this with landscapes and architecture. I even do this with editorial portraits or environmental portraits where I might have a person in the shot and also the background. And a lot of times I'm fighting light. I'm dealing with very bright backgrounds, very bright skies, and sometimes if I don't have a flash on the camera, I need to be able to pull the details out on the person. So Aurora allows me to blend these together and get the best of all my images. So to give you an idea how this works, I'm going to jump back into Aurora. I'm going to just close out the application and start fresh. Now that you kind of see where we're ultimately going, let me go back to this road to nowhere. Now, I'm working with RAW files, but you can also work with JPEGs and PIC files and TIFF files, all the flavors that Aurora can open. The nice thing about RAW is it does have a lot more information, a lot more detail. They're a lot larger, so it takes a little bit longer to open up, but it works just as well with JPEGs. But you sometimes don't have the latitude in the raw images. So I always recommend, if you're shooting bracketed, try to shoot raw. And so let's go ahead and select these images and drop them on. So I'm going to simply select 81, 82, 83, 84, 85. You can see I can count. Okay, I shot 7 bracketed images. This is kind of a final exported JPEG. So I can take this, I can either right-click and say open in Aurora, or I'm going to just drag it and drop it directly onto the Aurora icon. And you can open up your images from inside the application if it's already open. There'll be an option to open the application. Or you can do exactly what I did, which is drop it on your Start tab or your dock if you're on a Mac, or even if you have a link of the icon on your desktop, you can just simply drag and drop. You can see there's the 7 images, and Aurora has determined that you know what my bracketing was. I shot up -3, 2, and 1, underexposed, and then I overexposed by 1, 2, and 3 stops. Now you can work with this. As I said, a single image, a couple images. A lot of it depends on how many images your camera can shoot. And then the other decision you usually make when shooting is how many stops between each image. And that's, you know, kind of one of those situations where the more you shoot, the better sense you have. But if I have a very wide dynamic range and I have really bright skies and really deep shadows, I generally like to use about 1 stop between each of my images. Now, in this case, my camera would let me shoot 7 images, so 1 stop is nice. If I only wanted to shoot 3, I might shoot 1.5 stops or 2 stops between them. That's something you're going to need to practice. But I have 1 full stop between each, And then if I wanted to create an HDR, I would click on this little blue button on the right. But there's a couple of decisions you need to make prior to creating your HDR, so Aurora knows how best to merge these images. The first choice you'll need to make is this checkbox right here that says alignment. So in this case, I did not want to set up a tripod in the middle of the road in case I had to move quickly. So I did hand hold this. So the nice thing is, if you're shooting something where you're shooting bracketed and you are shooting handheld, if you click on alignment, Aurora will look at each of the images and best align them so you don't get any kind of a blur. So that's the first thing I want to check. Now, if you take a look to the left of where it says alignment, you'll see a little cog, and that's a little drop down, and that gives you a few more choices. And the first choice is ghost reduction. So what this does is, if there's objects within your frame when you took the picture, and this doesn't matter whether it's handheld or on a tripod, if there's movement within the frame, if you blend them together, you might get a blurry image where, say, a car drove by or a person was in the shot and moved a little bit. So you can tell Aurora which is the primary image you want to use and remove the ghosts or the movement out of the other images. So this is a very useful feature to turn on. And once you activate that, you have a choice of which is the primary image that you want to use to remove, to use as the primary, as I said, and then it removes the ghosts from the other images. And then depending on the amount of movement, you can choose how aggressive you want Aurora to be when it calculates what that final starting image is going to be. Usually the default of medium is pretty good, but if you blend an image together and you see there still is a problem, if you see a little bit of ghosting, you may want to go back and assemble them with a more aggressive or a higher ghost reduction. Now, there probably wasn't a lot of movement here, maybe a little bit in the clouds, but that's okay. I'll tell you one thing. I don't mind a little bit of movement in my clouds because when I blend them together, it gives it a nice soft feel in the clouds. What I want is a really crisp road and really crisp mountains. Clouds are allowed to be soft. So I would turn this off in this case. Now, I'm going to show you some examples of when I shot a person and there was movement and the advantages and the disadvantages of checking ghost reduction. A couple of other features that you may want to check is there's color denoise. So that's a situation where if you have really dark shadows, sometimes the camera is really fighting to pull images onto its sensor and you'll get noise. So this will actually help remove that noise. It's not very necessary if you don't have those really deep dark shadows. So it's, again, your choice. Now, I keep saying this is your choice, and our knee-jerk reaction as well, I want everything to be great, so I'm going to check alignment, I'm going to check ghost reduction, I'm going to put it to maximum, I'm going to do color denoise, and then I'll talk about chromatic aberration in a moment. And you can check all these, and the end result is you may get a tighter image or the same image, but it's going to take a lot longer to calculate. So you really shouldn't check things if they're not necessary, because what happens is you're actually causing the application to do a lot more work than is necessary. So in this case, I am going to leave color denoise on. And finally, chromatic aberration, that is something that happens a lot of times when you either have high contrast areas. So for instance, in some of these overexposed images, if I looked at the very edges where, say, the sky hit the mountains, I might see that purple or green fringing. You also see this sometimes depending on your lens. Some lenses have greater chromatic aberration on the outer area. So if you know that that's going to be the case, if you check that, Aurora will fix that as it combines all the images. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to leave this at color denoise, not going to do any ghost reduction. I am going to do alignment because I did hand hold this, and I'm going to say create an HDR. Now, while it's doing this background merging, I'm going to show you what an image would look like if I did not turn on ghosting, and this is with an individual. Let's see if I can bring up all of these in one preview. Now, I shot this handheld, but ghosting was turned off, and she moved a little. So what happens is the background's relatively sharp, but she is a little bit soft. So I have several different variations of the boxes that are checked. If I go to this next one, this is what it looks like if my alignment was never turned on. So not only is it shaky because I did this handheld, but also she moves. So you can see this would be really challenging to create if I didn't have the ability to check those boxes. But this is my final, which is everything aligned. And as you can see, she can be very sharp and the background can be sharp. And then I can start processing the image and start pulling out a lot of the information from the sky and the grass. So that's an idea of the benefits of using those checkboxes and what happens if they're not checked. So meanwhile, let's jump back to our image here. I'm going to bring this full screen again. So it has blended all of those images together and tone mapped it so that I have a nice balanced image to start working with. And just so you can get a sense of what this was like before, I'm going to once again go back to my desktop, find one of those images that are either under or overexposed, and I'm going to just show you what it looked like prior to merging. So here's an example of, this is, I don't have a lot of the detail here, it's too dark. And what I wanted to ultimately do is bring this all together, my Aurora, there we go. So now we have a nice tone mapped image and I can start leveraging the benefits of Aurora. Now there's a couple of ways that you can attack your image. You can start working with individual filters, and we're going to actually do that second, because a lot of times you just want to have a nice looking image and you want to have it done quickly. So what we have is we have a series of presets you can apply to an image to give you different types of looks. Now you can find all of these presets in a pop-up window where you see the word categories. So these are all ones that ship with Aurora. There's a couple of additional ones I have here that you can download from our website, and Laurie will explain how you can get those additional presets at the end of the webinar. But for instance, if I brought this in and I'm going to jump to landscape, and this will give me a variety of predefined looks that I can apply to my image. So for instance, if I wanted to have a nice realistic high dynamic range image, I might click on landscape realistic. And if you notice, it was very subtle, but everything kind of pops a little bit. And I want to be able to see what the before was like and the after. And there's a couple of ways that I can do that. At the very top of the interface, at the top of my screen, there are two icons. To the left looks like a little eyeball. And if I click on that, it shows me my before and my after. Now, the before is still my toned image, but the after is the image with all the filters and processing applied. Another way that I can review the before and the after is the button to the right of that. That's the compare button. And if I click on that, it gives me a slider and I can actually look at my before and after that way. And you can see with just the click of one preset, I got a pretty nice image. Let me go ahead and turn off my compare. And as you can see, we're now back to the image. And if I wanted to, I could go ahead and try other ones to see if I like them better. So along the bottom, I have variety here. I'm going to look at maybe landscape detailed. And I like what it's done to the ground. I'm not really happy with the clouds. So I could keep this or I could modify it. But I want to show you that if you wish, you can go ahead and you can switch to, say, another series of presets. So instead of landscape, I'm going to go in and do maybe something a little more dramatic. And as you can see, when I switch to any of the preset categories, I can see a small reference image of what that picture will look like with that preset applied, with those filters applied. So I'm going to go ahead and try maybe warm day. It definitely is giving me that golden hour sunset look. There's cool day. So you can very quickly get to a point where either you're done with your image and you're ready to export it, or you've reached a good starting point that you want to then modify. I'm going to go back and choose another image. I'm going to maybe go here to impressive. Now I'll tell you, I really liked warm day. That had a nice feel to it. But now I want to be able to tweak it. And the nice thing about the presets in Aurora are that they're live. So the first thing I can do is, you'll notice when I click on any of these presets, there's a little amount slider. So I can dial back how aggressively this preset is applied to my original image. If I don't like it, if I think it's too strong, I can move that slider back and blend the processed image with my original image. So perhaps I like that sunset, but it was a little too aggressive. Now this seems more natural. I like it. I'm done. So again, what was my before like? A simple road, but I can see all the detail. And now it really pops and I have that feel of sunset. So exactly what's happening behind the scenes? I'm going to go ahead and again turn off my compare. When I apply any preset, you'll notice that on this panel to the right, some of the colors have changed from white to yellow. And what that indicates is that this preset has applied these 6 filters, or modified these 6 filters to give me this look. And if I click on any of these items, it will reveal a series of sliders for that filter. And just like the preset is live and I can blend that with my original image, I can also tweak the preset, or what's been applied with the preset, to get exactly the look I want. So if I wanted, say, the road to be a little sharper, I may go in and may punch up the high dynamic range enhance. As I go down, I look at HDR structure. That's also been added to it. And I could punch that up and really start bringing in detail in the road. Now, when I'm working with some things such as structure or noise, I like to be able to zoom into my image to 100%, because I can really see what is happening to my pixels. And there's a couple of ways that I can do this. In the upper left-hand corner of the interface, you'll see there's 3 little buttons here. On the far left, this one says 43%, which means I'm looking at this image scaled down to 43% of its original size. If I click on that drop down, I can choose to view this a variety of different ways. I'm on fit to screen, so based upon my screen resolution, that's why it's 43%, but I want to look at this at 100%. So I click on 100%. It'll take a moment to calculate all the math, and now I can actually see at 100% what's happening when I'm playing with things such as structure, or even maybe the microstructure to give me detail. And I'm going to bring that slider over, and you can see that it's brought a lot of detail into the mountains. That's a plus. On the minus side, my clouds have gotten a little bit too crunchy, and I'm going to fix that in a little bit with another layer. But for now, I kind of like this crunchiness. I really want to feel the texture of this image, so I can go ahead and I can play with these sliders. Now, I pointed out earlier that I could use this little eyeball, this little compare eyeball, to look at the before and after. But if I just wanted to see what the effect of just this HDR structure filter was, there's also an eyeball here that I can click just to deactivate that one filter. So as you see, if I click on it, it actually, there's a little line through it. It's kind of hard to see probably on the webinar, but it's crossed out, and you can see that crunchiness is gone. So I can see exactly what this filter is doing to my image. And actually, I really do like what it's doing to this image. At least I like what it's doing to the bottom part of this image. So when I applied this preset, it basically modified a variety of filters. And when you modify any filter, it will go from white to yellow. So let's say I wanted to play with the color a little bit. I'm going to click on the color. You'll see it'll drop down. And there's 3 areas or 3 sliders that I can adjust: saturation, vibrance, and color contrast. So what's the difference between saturation and vibrance? Well, saturation is if I brought it up, all the colors are equally getting more saturated. If they already were saturated, they may become super saturated. If they were dull, they may become normal. But I don't want something that global. What I really like is vibrance. Vibrance is smart saturation. If something is already saturated, it won't increase its saturation as much. But if it's less saturated, if it's more dull, it will punch it up a lot more. So it's relative. So a lot of times with an image, I'll actually bring down my primary saturation, and then I'll bring up the vibrance, and that'll pop all of the colors. So it kind of evens out the saturation. And as you can see, if I click on the eyeball, this is before, and it'll take a minute to adjust. It's pretty subtle here, and this is the after. If I really wanted this to be a lot more aggressive, I can bring the vibrance up a little bit more and cause my image to really have a lot of color saturation. The other thing I want to point out is as soon as I modified any one of these filters, it changed from white to yellow. So this is great because I can quickly determine what filters have been turned on and activated and which ones have not. So if I go back here and I want to turn something off, I'm going to go over here to, say, to my polarizing filter. And the polarizing filter, for those of you who haven't used one, allows you to take the blues and really make them a lot richer and deeper. It's great for skies. In the analog world, basically you would screw this filter onto the front of your camera, and it would not filter light specifically in that it would add the blue, so it would be filtering out the opposite. But what it does is light bends in all different directions, and a polarizing filter allows light in from only one vertical or horizontal direction. So the net effect is you get a richer, deeper sky. So this is recreating that digitally. So if I wanted my skies to be a richer blue, I could go ahead and pull this to the right. And you'll see that blue got a little bit richer. It's not truly a deep blue, but it did help. If I didn't want this at all, of course I could turn it off. But the big thing is what I would like to do is reset this filter to the default. And you can reset any filter very easily by clicking on the counterclockwise arrow. And if I click on that, it resets the filter, and you'll notice it has gone from yellow back to white. So it's not being applied. So that way I can very quickly determine what's going on with my processing. And then once again, off and on. Now, if I don't like what I've done, let's say I did something really crazy. Let's say I went over here to my HDR basic and I just knocked enhance all the way up to make it really crunchy. And I took my exposure up and I said, what have I done? You can undo very easily. It's the same undo keyboard shortcuts that you probably know from other applications. On Windows, it's Control-Z or Control-Z, and on a Mac, it's Command-Z or Command-Z. So if I wanted to, I could use that keyboard shortcut, or at the very top of my screen, there are two buttons. The one on the left, again, a counterclockwise arrow, that is a single step of undo. And that'll just step me back one edit. To the right of that, there's a little clock. And if I click on that, I can see every edit I have done since I launched the application with these images. Okay, I clicked and zoomed in a little bit. Let me zoom out again. So if I've really messed up and I just want to go back and say, you know what, let's just pick it up right where I was working with Vibrance, I can jump back to that point in time. I can also use this history panel to see how I might have done something. So for instance, maybe it's like, well, how did I get this cool effect? I don't remember. What was the level of vibrance that I ended up with? It has recorded every single filter that's been modified, every single slider, and anything that's been turned on or turned off. And if you notice, even at the very beginning, when I applied a preset, it tells me what preset I applied and if I switch between them. So it's very useful to know your history, be able to go back. And if I go ahead and start editing at this point, everything above will get lost because I've created kind of a new parallel timeline. But I can always jump forward until I change anything. I can say, you know what? I liked everything I did all the way up to enabling that polarizer before I went crazy and started playing with the clarity and the exposure. So your history panel is very, very useful. While we're up here, while we're looking at some of the things at the top, I do want to point out this button right here. And as you can see, when I hover my mouse over it, it tells me what it is. It is the crop button. And I can crop my image at any point along the way. And when I select that button, I'll get my crosshairs, and I'll also get this overlay of the rule of thirds. So I can really get a sense of how I may want to crop my image. So by default, when you apply the crop button, it's freeform. I can go ahead and I can crop anywhere I want by simply dragging it. If I want, I can reposition it. It's all easy. But if I need to specifically have a certain aspect ratio, okay, I'm going to go ahead and click on Reset right here at the top. I can go over to the far left and click on this drop down, and I have choices of 2x3, so that would be like a 4x6 print, or maybe 4x5, which is an 8x10, or a 16x20. I can go ahead and crop this to a specific aspect ratio if I know that I need to deliver that to my client as an 8x10 image, or maybe I'm sending it out to a video and I want it to be 16:9, which is the aspect ratio for high definition television. So once I select the aspect ratio, now when I adjust this image, the crop will be exactly the aspect ratio that I need it to be. Now, one of the really cool aspect ratios that I think that are included with Aurora is the Facebook cover and Facebook feed. There are so many times that I have this great panorama and I want to put it on Facebook, but I never can remember what the actual aspect ratio is. I post it, the top and bottom are cut off, or the sides don't really look right. So here, I know exactly what the aspect ratio is for a Facebook cover. And I'm going to go ahead and stretch this all the way out to the edges. And I can position this. And now when I hit done, I have the perfect crop. So when I upload it to Facebook, which I can do directly from this interface, it's going to look exactly how I want it to look. So I kind of like this. This is fun. So we're going to keep this in this really wide CinemaScope Facebook look. And I want to show you a couple of other things that I can now do with my image. So I'm going to go through and just talk about some of the other filters that are available. We have training on our website that goes into much more detail. And Laurie will also show you where you can get access to the manual, which literally explains what every single filter does and what all of the sliders within each filter does. So some of the ones that are really very useful, other than the ones that we've already talked about, top and bottom tuning is, again, one of my favorite ones, because when you're dealing with earth and sky, sometimes you really want to be able to work on them separately. So I can click on Set Orientation, and I see an overlay of where the top and the bottom would transition. I can also control, by simply grabbing the lines above and below, how smooth that transition is between the top and the bottom, or how abrupt it's going to be. So I'm going to keep it a little bit abrupt. And now that I have that positioned, I can go ahead and I can warm up the earth. And I'm going to, oh, that's the top. So let me hit undo. I'll hit my button right here. I wanted to go to the bottom, warm that up a little bit. I really want that golden look. And then for the top, it's the sky, so let's go ahead and we'll cool that off. Okay, so just this one set of sliders, I'm going to turn this on and off, have just really added some nuance to my image and made it pop the way that I want it to. The other things I can do is I'm going to go ahead and maybe, I want the bottom to just pop a little bit more vibrance there, and maybe a little more contrast. So I can go ahead, I can work with top and bottom tuning. And that's really nice. And here's a little trick for those who might have been using it. I'm going to undo this, but just because it says top and bottom doesn't mean you can't rotate it and do it left and right. So a lot of times, you know, I might have an image where I really want to control maybe just the exposure of one half. I can do that very easily with top and bottom tuning. Now, it doesn't really work for this image. So let me go ahead and undo that step, bring it back to even. And I just want to point out a couple of other filters, and then we're going to go ahead and actually create another layer to start playing with nuances, say, in the sky. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over here to probably just the vignette, just to finish this off. And we'll look at the other ones in a moment. And with the vignette, what I want to do is really focus the viewer's eyes in the center of my image. So a lot of times, you know, as you can see, as I pull that in, you can get a much more or much too aggressive vignette. But I want to show you a little trick when working with vignettes. I'm going to bring it all the way down intentionally. I'm going to take the feather all the way down. And now I can truly see the shape of my vignette. And I usually like to do this whenever I'm doing any kind of processing, because then I can start playing, and if I wanted to, I can truly see what that roundness slider is doing and what the size slider is doing. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and then I'm going to bring that amount back up to its default, maybe a little bit under, and bring that feather back up. So now I can really, truly control what part of my area is shadowed and what part of my area is highlighted. And sometimes I even like to bring up that inner brightness, especially if I'm throwing a vignette and I'm focusing on a specific object in the foreground or a person. So that's my vignette. It just helps focus the eye. So very subtle. And the key to a vignette is the more subtle, the better. So let's suppose I have this processed and I really like it. I can go ahead and export and save this image and I'm done. Okay, so if everything is good here and I wanted to just export this so I can upload this to Facebook, I can go to the upper right where it says share image. There's a share image button, and I can go and export the image. I can do the same thing, and this is just whatever works for you, under File, and you also can export there. So I click on Export, and when you export an image, you'll get a variety of choices. Now, I'm working on a Mac, but it works exactly the same on a Windows machine. I get the choice of what flavor of image or what type of image I want to export, whether it's a JPEG, maybe to upload to the web, or maybe I want to export a TIFF file for printing. I can export a .psd file, a PDF file. I can be very specific in the type of image or flattened image that I export. If I choose to do a TIFF file, I can export both an 8 or 16-bit image. And if you're new to developing, basically a 16-bit image has a lot more color depth. So there's a lot more nuance in your colors. Sometimes you might get banding in the sky on an 8-bit image. And the difference between an 8-bit and a 16-bit image is, we're going back to high school math, if you were stuck in there, and it's an exponential growth. So it's 2 to the 8th or 2 to the 16th. So 2 times 2 times 2, 8 times, or 2 times 2, 16 times. And as you can see, that could get to be a very large color, and that's for each of the red, green, and blue. So you literally are going from millions of colors to billions of colors. So if you need that for printing, it's very easy, and you can even pick the color space that you want, depending on who you're delivering to. So this is really nice. You can resize, a lot of controls here. And so that's if you wanted to export or save an image. I'm going to cancel for now, because I want to show you the other way that you might save your document. Okay, so we'll go back up under File, and you can also do a Save As or a Save. And what this is going to do, it's going to save an Aurora project file. Now, what an Aurora project file does is it actually embeds the original material. So in this case, the 5 bracketed images, as well as all of the math that I used to make my final image, into a single folder or package, which looks like an icon. Now, what's really nice about this is if I save this and then in, say, a month want to tweak it again, I can open up that Aurora package and all my sliders are still live. I can go back and modify things. So this is a way of archiving or saving all of your work in case you wanted to change it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and if you're switching between Mac and a PC, you might want to switch to Windows compatible, because the way Windows files are saved and the way Macintosh files are saved are slightly different. So it's just one thing to keep in mind, but the net effect is exactly the same. When I open up that project file, I'll still see all of my changes, my yellows and my whites, and I can go ahead and tweak them if I want. So it still's live. So that's the idea of saving and exporting. I want to show you a couple of things, and then we'll probably take some questions. So I have this image, and I really like it. But my gut says the clouds are a little too crunchy for my taste. I want this to look sharp, but I don't want it to look fake. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to go up to the upper right-hand corner, and you'll see there's a little plus button, okay? And that allows me to create an additional layer. And when I click on that plus button, I have several choices. And what you can see is from the top down, it says add new adjustment layer, which is ultimately what I'm going to do. There's add a new image layer. So for instance, if I wanted to bring in another image and blend it on top, maybe a texture, I could go ahead and bring that in as a separate layer and then blend it together with what's below using opacity and blending modes. I could bring in an original image layer, which means I could go and bring in one of the six, I'm sorry, if the original image layer would be just that starting point of the blended images, maybe I wanted to bring that in and then I could go ahead and mask and bring in some parts where I wanted to kind of go back to where I started, or add a new HDR bracket layer. And what this does is allows me to bring in just one of the frames that I used to make the blending. So maybe I said, you know what, I just want to bring in one of the really dark ones because I want to be able to use the dynamics of those clouds. So I can bring in multiple layers and multiple things. I'm going to go ahead and go back to a more simple strategy, which is a new adjustment layer. And when I bring on a new adjustment layer, you'll notice that all those yellow highlights are gone. That's because this new layer will now allow me to apply new filters on top of my image. So for instance, I want my clouds to be less crunchy. So I'm going to go over here to high dynamic range structure. And instead of moving it to the right, I'm going to move it to the left. And this actually softens the clouds. You'll notice the before, if I turn that off, and it just softens the clouds. But it also softened everything. So I like what it did to the clouds, but of course I don't want to lose all that other hard work that I did. And that's where taking my layers and blending them together using a mask comes into play. So what a mask allows me to do is say, oh, I just want to affect the sky, and I don't want to affect my mountains or my road. So to access the masking feature, you go to that specific layer, and you'll see there's a little paintbrush. And if I click on that paintbrush, it should turn yellow when I click on brush. You have a couple of other options here. Instead of painting something with a brush, you may want to do a radial mask, which is a circle mask, or a gradient. So if I don't want to, if I know I have a pretty even space, I could go in and say, okay, gradient mask. When I click on that, I can go ahead and draw that gradient. And what happens here is part of my image is affected and part isn't. Now, if I want to see precisely what's affected, in the upper left-hand corner, another way that once I'm in the masking tool, I get an eyeball and a drop-down menu. If I click on the eyeball, I see that parts of this image turn red. And anything that is red is considered opaque, and that's where my filters are affecting my image. Let me go ahead and turn that off. And it softened my clouds, but I want to actually be a little more extreme so you can actually see what I'm doing to my image. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my mask, click on that little brush again. And this mask is for this entire layer. So for instance, if I wanted to do something crazy and shift all my, my colors, I can go ahead and if I move this around, you'll see it's only affecting that top half. So that's what the mask is affecting. And of course, I would never do this because somebody would say, why did I turn the sky green? But I did this intentionally because I can show you that I used a gradient mask, which was okay, but mountains seemed to go above it. I didn't get all the sky. So even if you have a mask already created, I can go back in, click on the brush, and this time, instead of choosing gradient mask, I can click on brush and start painting in and out. If you notice in the upper left-hand corner, paint and erase, my existing mask that I already created. So this is my existing mask that we saw earlier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint in a little more of the sky. So as I paint, you see how that's turning ugly green. Don't worry, we're going to actually turn off that filter, but this way you can see what's going on. And then I can go to erase, and I don't want that filter to affect my mountains. So I'm creating basically a very loose mask right here. And I can change the size of my brush to be really precise a few different ways. I definitely can go up here, and each of these can become a virtual slider, okay, for size. I can also go to this drop down and adjust my brush, the softness and the opacity. If you come from Lightroom or Photoshop, if you may be aware that the left and right bracket keys allow you to make your brush larger and smaller. And if I hold down the Shift key as a modifier before I hit the left and right bracket keys, I can make this softer or harder. And if you look closely, you can see that center ring is getting closer to the edge. That's a harder brush. And if I make it softer, you see that center ring is further away. So I can be pretty precise. But for now, I'm being kind of sloppy, just because I want to show you how easy it is to modify your existing mask. So I could go back here. I did some erasing. Maybe I want to get a little closer to the mountains. I might zoom in with a nice hard brush and really paint it, but you'll get the idea. Let me turn off that overlay. And so now I've shown you what I'm affecting. I'm going to go ahead and reset that ugly green. There's my HDR basic. Reset that. Okay. And so now the only thing that's being affected is the structure. So that's where I'm getting some nice soft clouds. Maybe I'll punch up the polarizing filter because I'm dealing with the sky. And if you notice, the sky just got a little bit bluer. So by using an additional layer and a mask, I can start processing specific areas of my image and really get the look that I want. And you can add as many adjustment layers as you want to start tweaking things. Like maybe you wanted to bring, the road to be a little deeper black. I could go ahead and add yet another adjustment layer. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and bring my blacks down. And you'll notice that first it affects my whole image. Okay, but then I'm going to go in and I can grab my adjustment layer, grab the brush, paint this in. I'm going to go ahead and make a nice hard edge. And instead of erasing what I did before, I can go, as soon as I click on paint, you'll notice that where my brush is, I'm literally making my ground nice and dark. Okay, so it's very customizable. And again, probably would spend a couple seconds longer on this if I was doing this at 2 o'clock in the morning, which usually when I'm doing most of my photo processing. So I can always do a before and an after. So now I have a much nicer, deep, dark road. So that's how I would do this. And of course, I could export this. So that's a general idea of how I can work with this. One nice thing is that with the presets, which it comes with, are really nice. But let's say I really like a look that I developed. So I can save any of my layers that I might have manually created a look with. And all I have to do is, with that layer selected, go down to the bottom right corner of the interface, click on Save Filter Presets. Kind of tricky to see in the bottom right-hand corner, but I'll click on that. I'll get a dialog box and I'll be able to name this. And I'll call this, Evening Roadway. And then I'm going to save that. because I shot a bunch of images along this trip, and I want to be able to take advantage of some of the work I've already done. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. And it actually has created a preset called Evening Roadway. And that would be located, by the way, inside my user folder. So I could open up another image, and when I click on that, it will apply the filters exactly the way that I want them. So that's just the tip of the iceberg of what you can do in Aurora. It's an extremely powerful program, but the other thing, it's also a very simple program. You can bring an image in, you can quickly use a preset, get a look that you want, and export it, or you can spend a lot of time and work with layers and really finesse your image to exactly the way you want it. So with that, I'm going to throw it back to Laurie to see if there's any questions that you might have had during the webinar.
Great, thanks, Abba. Gerald had a really great question. He said, in addition to landscapes, what other type of photos are candidates for HDR? And Abba, you did show a really great one where it's kind of an environmental situation where you had a woman with a landscape, but there are some other genres of photography that work really good for HDR as well.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, in addition to landscape, internal architecture or real estate is great, because a lot of times you're dealing with a situation where the windows may be blown out and the interior may be dark. So a lot of time for interior architecture, I find it's very useful. For street life, a lot of times, wandering the streets of New York City or Chicago, I find that you can get some really nice imagery. And of course, big fan of sunsets and beaches. So those are really useful, but almost anything. As a matter of fact, we had a webinar that should be live that Jason Hahn did, where he uses it for wildlife photography. And as a matter of fact, Laurie is a wildlife photographer, and you use it bringing out some details on some of your animal shots.
Yeah, very similar to the woman in her landscape, just to really even out the tones throughout the image. And of course, you have the alignment and some of the ghost reduction features that you can use as well.
That's a great question. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I use this a lot in concert with Luminar. I'll do my initial toning in Aurora, and then sometimes I'll bring it into Luminar to take advantage of some of its unique filters.
Okay. Donette had a question now. Abba, you've been showing this as a standalone application. Maybe we could talk a little bit about using it as a plugin.
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, it works beautifully as a plugin. What I like about both Aurora and Luminar is that they play well with others. So in some cases, if I wanted to start in Luminar, which is, start in Aurora, which I think has, absolutely brilliant bracketing, blending, and toning, I might bring it in, and then there might be something that I want to do in, say, Photoshop or Lightroom. So it works really well with those Adobe applications. As a matter of fact, if I click on the upper right, I can also do this from the drop-down menus. I can open this image in a variety of other applications that are on my computer. In the case of my computer, because it's a Mac, I can also send it directly to Photos. But as you can see, I can send this directly to Photoshop and perhaps take advantage of some of the things that I know how to use in Photoshop that aren't in here. That's nice, as well as if I'm in Photoshop or Lightroom, I can use Aurora as a plugin and send it from Photoshop or Aurora, from Photoshop to Aurora, or from Lightroom to Aurora. And as you can see, I believe there should be a setting in here. And I just got to remember where it, generally when you install it, it says install it as a plugin to those other applications. There we go. And if for some reason you haven't, it's a little different. I believe it's under File on a PC, which is why I was looking there. But on a Mac, it's under the name Aurora. And you can say install plugins, and it will install this as a plugin to both Photoshop and Luminar. And just kind of a little trick, if you do start in Photoshop and you want to be able to go back and forth, just save that layer as a smart object, send it to Aurora or Luminar, and then you can come back. And if you need to change something, it still's live.
Very, very good. Okay, Alba, I think what I'm going to do is I'll switch over to my screen here. This is our website. It's skylum.com. And this is where you can find a ton of information. And Abba and I are really focused on the educational department. So we're working with content creators, some ambassadors of ours to create the best content for you, including these webinars, so that you can learn and take advantage of your software. So over here on the left-hand side, there's a menu, and if you click on that menu, you can actually sign up for an account. This will enable you to get some extras, extra freebies, and you'll also get a Skylum newsletter once a month. Some of our educational emails will come to you as well, just to give you a heads up for any updates, upgrades, any new things that are happening. Okay, now we've been really focused on Aurora, but you can see we do have a Luminar section here, and Aurora is down here. So if I click on Aurora HDR 2018, you'll see there's a whole website just dedicated to Aurora. And what I would invite you to do is go to the Education Center, and we have a bunch of video tutorials. In fact, Abba, you got a great, really nice compliment from Steve. He says you're freaking awesome. So
yeah, thank you so much, Steve.
So you can go over here to these videos, and we there's many by Abba, myself, and others, but you can go through and find some problem solving, maybe some inspirational type videos. And we like to keep these, 5 minutes, 8 minutes at the most. So they're real quick and nice and fun to watch. So you can go under there, and that was under Education for Video Tutorials. There's also a user manual, and Abba did talk about this. This is really one of those really great user tutorials because it goes through absolutely everything from filters, all the different sliders, your presets, installing. I know there's a question about accessing, I think, from Lightroom. You'll be able to find all that information here. And we would tell you that it's actually better to download the PDF format because you'll be able to search more information there a little bit easier. So if you can, whether you're on, actually this is a combination of Mac and Windows, just download that PDF user guide and put it on your desktop for a while to get easy access here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get back here. And we're gonna go over to, we have an education section. This is where you'll find a lot of blogs, video tutorials, things that are specific to Aurora or Luminar. In fact, Richard Harrington, who really heads up our education department here, does these quick tip kind of guides that are really great. So if you want to just get a little quick tip on renaming your layers, for instance, or that's for Luminar, but there's also for Aurora, you can just go through and scroll through here and take a look at those. Okay, and then we have a blog, we have webinars and events, so just take time, take a look at some of this information. Do check out our upcoming webinars. We have Serge Romilly, for instance, that's coming up, and some more webinars. And if you scroll down here to the bottom, you'll see some past events, so you can see some past webinars of ours. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Abba, for doing such a wonderful job teaching everyone the ins and outs of Aurora. And we hope that you folks will join us on another webinar. So take care, and hopefully we'll see you soon. And thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.